Welcome in everyone and welcome to the Cup of Tea channel. So the other night we had our Campfire livestream chat with the Diablo 4 developers going over what's to come next Tuesday, and this includes the Gauntlet leaderboard system, the Vampiric powers, and then also some additional further season 4 news as well. I've done a video covering all of this, so if you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the description below. But in this video we're just going to go into a little bit more depth of what patch notes 1.3.3 are all about. So without further ado, let's get started. And here we have the patch notes right here. They will be live on March 5th, so next Tuesday. And to start things off, we have the return of Vampiric powers. So Vampiric powers was the seasonal mechanic from season 2, and this time round, rather than it being a unique item as such, they're going to be converting these into legendary aspects, so these can be applied onto your gear. And with the developers note, they have said that select Vampiric powers from the Season of Blood have returned, with some tweaks made to make their power levels fit into the Season of Construct. These powers will be available as legendary aspects in all world tiers and in both Eternal and Seasonal realms. And it will be 6 of the Vampiric powers that will be making their return. We have the Accursed Touch, Metamorphosis, Blood Boiling, Hectic, Undying, and Moonrise. And between the 6 Vampiric powers, we have a good variety in terms of providing buffs towards your damage, giving you vulnerability application to your enemies, cooldown reduction, or even survivability. We now move on to the actual balance updates for uniques as well as legendary aspects, and starting things off for the Ring of Starless Skies. This is more of a user interface update where it will now show a buff on the bar whilst it is active. So when spending your primary resource, it will reduce the resource cost of your skills and increase your damage by 10% for 3 seconds up to 40%. And this will make it a lot easier for players to know when this effect is now active. And then moving back over to the other unique items, with Pentient Greaves, now the damage to shield enemies has been increased. Tassets of the Dawning Sky, the resistances have also been increased by a small amount. And then finally, Mother's Embrace, the resource refund has been increased from 20 to 40% to 30 to 50%. We're then going over to the legendary aspects, where on Inner Calm, damage maximum has been increased from 30 to 40%, and for Retribution, the stun chance has been increased from 8% to 10%, and the damage to those stunned enemies has been increased from 10 to 20 to 15 to 25%. And finally for Starlight, the amount of life healed needed for resource gain changed from 25 to 20%. And when it comes to item changes as well, Uber Uniques have also received a change when it comes to crafting. So now instead of 5 Resplendent Sparks or 5 Uber Uniques required to craft your own, you only need 4 this time round. So now we're going to move over to the class changes, and starting things off, we had the Barbarian, and the main changes you're going to see here is all to do with their basic skills. They've increased the damage on some of its abilities, but also the amount of fury you generate from it as well. And then moving on to the main skills, the Enhanced Flare vulnerability duration has been increased from 2 to 3 seconds. Strategic Ground Stomp has the ultimate cooldown reduction increased from 1 to 2 seconds. Strategic Iron Skin Fortify amount increased from 15 to 20%. And finally, the Prime Call of the Ancients bonus damage has been increased from 10 to 20%. And then when it comes to the Barbarian passives, Endless Fury has also received a buff as well, where your basic skills would generate you a certain amount of fury. This has now been increased to 10, 20 to 30%. Moving over to the Executioner glyph, while wielding a polearm, you now deal 10% increased damage, and it does not require them to be healthy or injured. And now moving over to the legendary aspects, where Aspect of the Iron Warrior, the damage reduction has been increased to now 25 to 35%. And finally, the Gaul's Devastating Grips, where the ranks of Whirlwind have been increased as well as its damage output. And now moving over to the Druid class, where very similar to the Barbarian, where they focused upon the basic skills, they've made some damage increases, but also the amount of spirit you generate when using these abilities. And then also the Druid companions are also receiving some love as well, with Wolves, Poison Creepers, and Ravens. Their passive damage has been increased as well as their active damage. And now moving over to the Druid passives, with Quick Shift, Bestial Rampage, Earthing Strength, and Perfect Storm all receiving a substantial buff. For the legendary aspects, the Seismic Shift, nothing much has changed apart from actually having an additional bonus damage applied on 35 to 50%. And then finally, when it comes to the unique items for the Druid, Storm's Companion, the ranks of Wolves has been increased from 2 to 3 to now 3 to 4. And in addition, the damage from Stormhowl has been increased by 180%. We now move over to the Necromancer, and very similar to Druids in terms of buffing the companions, the Necromancer minions have also receiving quite substantial buffs to their damage output, but also their health pool as well. With these changes, we may see a lot more minion builds for the Necromancer, and maybe even some top placements on the Gauntlet leaderboard system too. Moving over now to core skills for the Necromancer, and Blood Surge has actually had a little change in terms of its functionality, where beforehand the damage bonus per enemy drained reduced from ×10 to ×5%, and the Nova damage itself has been increased by 40%. In the developer's note, they said the goals of this change is to reduce the opportunity cost of using Blood Surge against fewer numbers of enemies, as well as increasing its overall power, even in scenarios of hitting multiple enemies. And in addition, other core skills for the Necromancer such as Sever, Blight, Corpse Explosion, Bone Prison, as well as Blood Wave have also received buffs in terms of damage, but also effects as well. Now moving over to the Necromancer passives, and Death's Approach has actually received a name change to now Death's Reach, and the reason for this is they've actually changed the way it works. Beforehand, it was a damage increase to distant enemies. It has now been actually changed over to give you an actual baseline movement speed increase. Spiked Armor and Death's Embrace have both had their defensives increased. Hellbent Commander has also received a damage increase, and Crippling Darkness, instead of just stunning them for 1 second for a 15% chance, it now with the 15% chance has a chance to stun them for a longer duration and deal additional shadow damage. And for the Necromancer Paragon, for Cult Leader Legendary node, that has received a damage increase, and Corporeal Glyph has also been changed to now, instead of just giving you a damage output, it gives you movement speed as well per active minion. And then finally for the Necromancer Legendary aspects, Aspect of Hardened Bones, the damage reduction is also applied to your minions, and then also some changes for the Blood-Bathed aspect as well. We now go over to the Sorcerer, and as they mentioned in the Campfire chat where they were focusing on improvements for the Incinerate, we received some buffs for that, and in addition Hydra and Ball Lightning have also received some damage buffs too. And for the Sorcerer's passives, Icy Veil, Snap Freeze, Avalanche, and Shocking Impact have all received some buffs and changes, but the main focus here is Soulfire, where beforehand, after standing still for 1.5 seconds, your Pyromancy skills cost 5, 10, 50% less mana. This time round, your Pyromancy skills cost 4% less mana, and now deals 2% increased damage, and these will double if you stand still after 2 seconds. Now moving over to the Sorcerer's Paragon, where a selection of glyphs have also received some buffs in terms of damage reduction, as well as mana regeneration also. And then finally for the Sorcerer, the legendary aspect, Searing Wards has the mana cost reduction from 100 to 200, now down to 75 to 125, and Overwhelming Currents, where the chances increase from 10 to 20% to now 15 to 30%. And now onto the final class, which is the Rogue. And with the Rogue, during the Campfire chat, they did say they want to make improvements to the marksman ranged-based abilities and skills that the Rogue has. So with Heartseeker and Forceful Arrow, they've received some damage increases there. But Flurry has also received some improvements as well. And in fact, they've actually made a change to the improved Flurry, where if now it hits an enemy and makes them vulnerable, it's actually going to apply a 20% multiplicative damage increase also. Or if you decide to go with Advanced Flurry this time around, rather than it stunning enemies for 2.5 seconds, when you use it on an enemy, the next Flurry will deal 30% increased multiplicative damage and stun them for 2.5 seconds. And then backed with some ranged abilities, Rapid Fire and Rain of Arrows have also received a 10% damage increase also. Now moving over to the Rogue's passes, where Precision, now the stacks required for the bonuses has been reduced from 6 to now 4, and when it comes to the Paragon board, the Infusion Glyph, the cooldown reduction has been increased from 0.5 seconds to now 1 second. Now onto Rogue legendary aspects, with Encircling Blaze receiving a small damage increase, and opposite to that was Shadow Slicer, that's actually receiving a much larger damage output increase, where beforehand it was doing 80 to 100% base damage. It has now been increased to 200 to 300%. Branching Volleys, however, actually received a change in its functionality. So beforehand, Barrage's Arrows had a 15 to 25% chance to split into 2 arrows whenever it ricocheted. This time round, it now has a damage increase between 40 to 60-80%. In addition, Barrage's Arrows have a 40 to 60% chance to split into 2 arrows whenever it ricocheted, so they actually increase the likelihood that it would split also. And then finally for the Rogue, the unique items, Eagle Horn, Eyes in the Dark, and Writhing Band of Trickery all receiving a damage increase, but Writhing Band of the Trickery is also receiving a cooldown reduction on its Shadow Decoy from 12 seconds down to 10 seconds. And then to the final couple of sections of the patch notes, one being the Seneschal, where they've actually applied some nerfs as some of the abilities were overperforming, but also there were some unintended interactions with some of the abilities, so they have fixed these also. And then the final section of the patch notes is the user interface and user experience. Looking through these notes right here, such as players' equipped skills and now displayed on their profile. This is very much linked to the Gauntlet leaderboard, so this allows players to actually check out other players, see what builds they're using, what rank they are on the leaderboards, everything like that. And the final point is a feature that I've actually been waiting for quite a while, which is now we can actually see the character's time played, which will be displayed at the bottom of the player's profile. And that covers everything for patch notes 1.3.3 right there. If you did find this video useful, don't forget to drop a like to the video because it really does help my content out. And in addition, if you do enjoy my content, maybe even consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And finally, let me know in the comment sections what class and builds you're going to be using in the Gauntlet leaderboards. And until then, I will see you in the next video. Take care.